about who we are. And this is why this particular show is called Dzinde, the Roots, a show that celebrates the rich history, our cultural heritage as Africa. Today, we're going to be exploring the role of traditional monarchies in Africa and how they've been impacted by the historical developments. Join me, FoLake, the Nubian Queen, the International African, as we delve into the past, the present, and hopefully into the future that we want, the Africa we want. Justice. By the time the sun kissed the skies, the Roji army had positions around the Kalanga village, placing themselves in a formation they had been instructed by Dombo. In a horseshoe formation covering the main entrance into the village, the army camouflaged themselves in the grass. Within proximity, they could monitor the events that took place. The king's guard was instructed to create a blitz formation from the back of the village, along with the archers. There was, of course, the instruction as well not to kill the king and his daughter. They were his lives to claim, he felt. Now, with the Roji in position, what was left in the plan was the right time to attack. It was important to Dombo that the position of the king be identified before the attacks began. As per tradition, kings and the elders always met in the morning in the consultation rooms to discuss the events of the day. This consolidated Dombo's attack, for all they had to do was wait for the king and his elders to shut the door. The burning arrow would fired into the skies, and this was a sign for the king's guard and the archers to attack from behind. While monitoring the activities, Dombo noticed a young boy. Something about him strikingly stood out, and Dombo could not move his concentration from him. He headed to the crows alone and started preparing to take the head out. In silence, his wandering thoughts came to a realization, or perhaps his heart spoke to his head. The purpose of his travels early in the morning toward the village of the Kalanga was to exert vengeance on what their king had done. And now, seeing the boy made him reflect on himself when he was a child. With no idea, clues, or plots, he was pained by the thought of having one's young life cut short because of an old man's foolishness. Dombo realized continuing the blind vengeance would later come back to haunt him. Word was sent to the commanders, women and children are not to be harmed. It came as a surprise for most because they were certain Dombo wanted not just a victory, but to wipe the entire village away. So how could this be with survivors? A very pleasant surprise though, and so it was welcome. I'm reading to you from the book written by Philip Tinashe Gwatidzo, Changamire Dombo the Legend, and he is but one of the many kings in our history. You might have heard of Amina, the queen of Zaria in Nigeria, Makada, the queen of Sheba in Ethiopia. What about Nefertiti, queen of ancient Kemet in Egypt, and the original Nubian queen herself, Kendake, the empress of Ethiopia herself, and she said she was a queen who led the Kandakes, as they were known, who were fiercely independent, ruling over powerful military kingdoms as warriors themselves. And then there were the African kings. Menelik the first emperor of Ethiopia, Shaka Zulu, the founder of the Zulu Empire. What about Oba Duduwa, Olofin Ile Ife, the divine king of the Yoruba? And of course, Changamire Dombo. These are but just a handful of men and women who have been mummified in legends in our history. But what do these legends and monarchs still tell us about our culture and who we are? And that's why we want to have this conversation today, understanding our history and where we are at today. And for us to be able to do that, I have a full panel as we always do. And guess what? We actually have a king in our conversation today. In fact, all of them are kings in their own senses, but this particular one is a reigning king. Let me start by the Mbira player you're hearing this morning. He answers to the name Joshua Maponga. Joshua, good morning and welcome to Capital.
Hello, good morning and greetings to all your listeners out there. Beautiful Friday.
Indeed it is. We also have on our line our regular voice that we love, who considers himself a powerful Africologist. He's also passionate about exploring Africa and its development, and he also happens to be one of the elders of our council, the King's Council that we have on the line. Good morning, Menzi. How are you this morning? And yeah, and in no way last but in no way least, His Royal Highness, we have got on the line King Tekiso Bakwena Bamare, who's also the chairperson and the founder of the Southern African Council of Elders. And this council itself is a sovereign, unincorporated entity that works really looking to maintaining our African values, but also holding the highest order. And we want to find out a little bit more about that. Good morning, Your Highness. Welcome to Capital. We're so excited to have you in our conversation this morning.
Good morning, good people. And you know what? I'm so happy to be here with the men that I've been hoping to appoint as the ambassador of peace.
I'm sure he's equally excited and he's already accepted the offer without him even saying so, because the smile on his face is telling.
Recognize him as the ambassador of peace.
Thank you so much for that.
Greetings, my honorable, and
Right. Yeah. Right, let's do just that. I'm going to start with Joshua, who's in the studio this morning. I started off reading an excerpt of a book written by one of my favorite young writers, Changamire Dombo, the legend. Changamire Dombo is a name that you also recognize as a king in our Zimbabwean history for what he did, looking even into the Roger Empire. I'm sure you are hearing some stories that were coming in. Take us back into time, Joshua, helping us understand monarchies themselves, where they came from, what were they about, and just giving some of the examples I was giving you of people in history, queens and kings that are, forever embedded in our African history. When you look back to some of those legends and some of those monarchs, what do they tell us about our culture and who we were, do you think, Joshua?
Thank you very much, FoLake, for the opportunity and the beautiful question that you ask. Unfortunately, maybe let me start on the downside, that when the modern generation is looking back at the concept of our kings, we are looking at it from a cultural side. And we can't help it because that's all we know. But we forget that in the ancient times, the entire society or community was circulating around the king. Kings were the centers of business. When you look at Mutapa, for example, the trade routes that he established with the Mozambican routes and etc. You look at the issue of mining, it was happening within the palace. The industrialization, the building of the Great Zimbabwe, for example, the building of the Great Pyramids of Giza, and the whole idea of societal survival was actually locked around the king, including the bank, because that was where the Dzinde came in, the Ilima came in, where the king had fields, where the community would come and work. Then we harvest that and keep it at the king's place. When someone in the community's field has been burnt or there's poor harvest, people would come to the king and then get their service. It was a court case where the disputes of the community were being settled. So it's not only right that over and above, of course, the community issues such as the absence of rain and etc. Then the king would make an announcement, and then sorghum, millets will be collected in the community. The rightful people were identified and then driven off to Njelele to go and do the necessary ceremonies. So the king's palace was, as it were, the central place where the bloodline, the entire heartbeat of the community would be from. As such, the kudu horn and the drum played this, our cell phones, because that's how we transmitted information across vast lands to announce what exactly was happening within the royal palace. So it's not just about beating drums and dancing kings. People already think about witchcraft and some traditional ceremony that is at the back of democracy. You know, we need the kings. Oh, then the first thing, let's get some few traditional people here. But we need to look at it in a holistic way. And how did they begin? It's an appointment. Not only appointment, a selection, a divine intervention, as it were. And all the kings have the way in which their initial father, grandfather was called into the office. And these are royal bloodlines which still live amongst us. Unfortunately, colonization has vulnerated some people who are illegitimate to become our modern kings. But I think that gives you quite a fair amount of background to where we are coming from.
Indeed it does. Menzi, give us some insights into what a tribe was. Where did it come from? And also, how did a tribe fit into the idea of a kingdom, as Joshua was explaining that, you know, sometimes the kingdoms and messages will need to be sent out through vast expanse areas of land, of space. Help us understand what a tribe is, how it fits into the idea of a kingdom, and where did tribes even come from, Menzi?
Well, a tribe is just a large family. The word tribe itself has been very much debated and problematized in the academic space. In fact, the word tribe is becoming a thing of the past. You know, we know that from the history books such as the Bible and all that, the word tribe features very prominently. You know, we know about the 12 tribes of Israel, but there's also very many other tribes, the tribes of Moab, the tribes of Ashir. There's various tribes. Every clan and every how to say, I don't know, I use the word politic, but every people, the word people is the one that is popular now. But what is people? Is basically a group of people that agree to certain cultural customs. They are connected through bloodline. They are connected through culture. They're connected through business. They're connected through trade. But generally, they're connected through a certain kind of shared idea about their particular ancestry. Our tribe comes from this particular ancestry. Baba Maponga mentioned something very important, just to link the tribe to the king. He said that ancient society basically operated around the monarchy. Now, that, and then he mentioned that some were appointed through divine intervention, but others were appointed through the head. Basically the head of a family, and then the head of a clan, who becomes the head of a nation, who eventually becomes the head of an empire, if the ambition of the particular clan is to become larger and larger and larger, and incorporate other tribes within it, or other clans within it, and other peoples, other languages even. Then it becomes an empire, like the empire in Ethiopia, like some of the empires in Sudan, the Napata Empire. You know, it was not made up of just one people who speak a Nubian language. It's made up of people who, through the power of maybe one family, they become part of one great empire. But that is usually done through conquest, right? It's sometimes through conquest, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through trade, and sometimes through even geopolitical, political climate situations where people are running away from a drought, or they're running away from a flood, and then they become part of the tribe that they become members of. I don't know if I'm putting it properly, English, but that's the point. So the appointment happens through various ways, but sometimes through heroism, sometimes through spiritual power. A particular healer becomes a leader of a particular community through the use of herbs, or the use of certain kinds of power. So power comes in many different ways. So that's how clans and tribes and nations and empires develop. Organization around power.
It's the program Dzinde the Roots, celebrating and always asking questions about who we are as Africans, and perhaps so that we can start to control the narrative that is out there about us, rather that it be written in our writing. This morning on a Friday, we have got some interesting voices coming in to help us understand where, you know, the context of our monarchies lie as far as Africa is concerned when we're looking today at modern Africa. How many monarchies can you actually name listening in, speaking to the king or the queen of that monarchy? I want to hear from you. 07191040. We started off our program looking at the historical developments of the monarchies and what exactly they were about, giving you some examples of some of the kings and queens that are out there. Joining us this morning for us to have this conversation is yourself, which you can do through 07191040. Joshua Maponga, whom is always here every single Friday, one of our leading thought leaders in Africa. Menzi Kaguru Maseko, an Africologist who is based in South Africa. He also happens to be an elder on a King's Council. And we also have His Royal Highness Paramount Chief Kokosi Tekiso coming from South Africa as well, as we're trying to understand what exactly monarchies are supposed to be doing in our context in 2024. Now, let's move forward into time, Joshua. Help us understand the decline of monarchies in Africa.
It can't be attributed to anything except dominance of the colonial powers that then used their economic muscle and military superiority to overrun the indigenous monarchs and their tribal leaders and institute instead the colonial system, which we have now have allowed to transit from apartheid and colonialism to what we might call democracy, which is just another whitewashed form of neocolonialism. But basically, it took the pressure, took war, bloodshed to be where we are, and the kings have been pushed into the doldrums of just drums and cultural rights.
How would you have defined the kind of governance that was akin with our traditional ancient monarchies?
It was ethnic, it was spiritual, it was grounded, and I think it was honest in that it respected the very land on which it lived on, and people had a voice, and communities and tribes, as it were, family, clans, all of them knew what to do and work around the palace. For example, when I went to Uganda, very exciting to notice that all their 12 tribes, as it were, that are linked up to the Uganda clan. Each one of them has got a role. There are those who make gowns for the king. There are those who do hunting for the king. There are those who plant food for the king. So literally, the skills that each tribe has or family has developed, they've actually become specialists in that, including even that Uganda mud cloth, not the back cloth. There's a family there that is now specialized, and the whole clan, they know how to do that. So then it crafting of things around the king. So it gave people meaning and value in terms of contributing as families. As such, these skills have now been transmitted from one generation to another generation. So
you spoke just now about the decline of our monarchies in Africa being attributed to one thing, which is colonialism. And most of us recognize the 60s as the upcoming of a new kind of African, where the word Pan-African started to, latch on to certain names and individuals. We had certain leaders, your Kwame Nkrumahs at that time, who were fighting for a certain kind of Africa. We saw also, if I can call it, even new emergence of ideology in Africa, right? Where we were looking at party politics. Why was it easier for the emergent African then to want to push the idea of this new ideology through party politics rather than reverting to what we knew, which was the monarchy set up of Africa?
Beautiful. Very interesting that you mentioned some of those stalwarts, because the very nature of their education was not an African education. Kwame Nkrumah, graduates of America, graduates of Oxford University, graduates of Britain. And how do you send your children to Caesar and expect them not to come back as Romans? So the very nature of the education system in which our Pan-Africanists went through was not a Pan-Africanism that would restore their lost power and give it back to the kings. Instead, when they came from the struggle, they inserted themselves as the kings. As now we have our presidents who are actually acting and behaving as if they are kings. So it's a transition of thinking, a transition of behavior, and most importantly so, it was now also supported by the very same system, because the initial colonial system felt they cannot give away the governments to uncivilized, quote unquote, uneducated, rural traditional people who will not be able to do business with them. It was more favorable to give power to these young guys who could speak English, put on a tie also, and know how to sip wine and have a meeting with the queen. And so it was progressive, but I think education was the weakest link, and lack of genuine patriotism to restore what was broken.
Menzi, Joshua said something very interesting there. He said, how can you send your child to Caesar and not expect him to come back Roman? So looking at now this new emergent ideology that we have as Africa towards party politics, towards this thing called democracy, maybe even a Republican sense of democracy, does it then not mean that this new thinking also is still somewhat of a tool used by colonialists, somewhat even to control us, maybe?
And are basically two sides of the same body, two hands of the same body. The question is now, what kind of education do we actually need to actually have a African kingdom that about African development, right? But I'd like to actually, I'm sorry, I'm not the host, but I want to get some of these questions to General Secretary because before he runs out of time.
Right.
Christianity and other religions, as well as the kind of education that we receive. We know where it has taken us and we know where we are. But we have solutions, actually practical.
Right.
But I'd really like to pass this question to him because I can speak a lot about this.
Okay, all right. Yes, you're right. We were going to get to him to talk to us about the restoration of traditional leadership, but let's do that. Your Highness, as you were listening in from South Africa this morning, we were just now, Joshua was talking about how, he says, if you take your child, if you give your child to Caesar, how would you not expect him to come back Roman? And I was asking, when we look at this new emergence of African party politics, which is also a form of this democracy principle, right, that we've latched onto, is this not somewhat a tool in itself that colonialists are still using to control us because it's still not indigenous to who we are? Your Highness, do we still have you on the line? Morning.
To control us, my sister, or my queen, because pardon?
We are listening. We're here.
There was already a system that was created to do that, and it all runs back from the words that we are using, the language that we are using. What does it do? The real meaning of those words. You know what we did now as traditional leaders in Africa is to drop a box, of our own ancient words. There's a book that I am trying to put together with the words of the African ancient words that were lost, so that we can bring them, because that's the only way that we can build our educational system that speaks about us. And so lucky because I said, the only way that you can do this is to totally disregard their curriculum that keeps your child under the roof the whole day and release that child as a prisoner. It's under management, because they know once that this child is not out of this type of educational system will be a problem to the government. So they don't need to do that. We're doing it ourselves on a daily basis. Our ID system, what does it really mean? The true meaning of words.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Yes. Okay, I think that makes sense. And isn't it quite laughable looking at the so-called new Republican democracy that we have on the continent? It really isn't working. Except, one argument says the most two stable countries in Africa are actually only the two countries that still have an active monarchy, and that is Morocco. And others will argue and say Eswatini, with everything else around it. So as you are looking in as a king, is that not a curious case where the only two stable countries on the continent are actually countries that still have an active monarchy, a governing monarchy?
because even now, as traditional leaders in Africa, it's the same direction we are taking. Because we saw that the people of Africa, as of SADC, are suffering, really suffering. Now, first thing you need to understand is that there are quite a few kingdoms that actually also exist.
Right.
But you must also look at the body of those issues, and you must look at the type of leadership you have in your country, and the minerals that they have.
Yeah.
And if those minerals are really benefiting, if there's a king, there's always going to be a strong monarch if there are minerals around, because he's the custodian of them, and he's also obviously going to make decisions on behalf of his people. So most of these royal families that were put in by governments in SADC are very dangerous, are the ones that are actually more dangerous you can even think, like the ones that we know that I'm not even going. Lot that went wrong in the rest of SADC and the borders that you see today, it would not have happened if traditional leaders didn't agree. So there's certain way that they agreed, but they agreed under the pretense of building the new Republic Union. The history is there. There's a lot of documents here of the correspondence between the South African apartheid government and my forefathers coming to this generation. We've been talking to them. So it really shows you that the constitutional state is not going to work at this moment. We need a united government between the people. The people themselves must declare that the formation of their type of government that they want, and how that government is going to run their affairs.
So if we're speaking to the idea of ancient Africa, ancient kingdoms, and the laws that we were using, how do we apply that today as far as development is concerned? What sort of governance do you think would be key in Africa, rising towards the Africa we want again, which sounds like you are also saying a more united Africa, which is also giving us true justice in the face of everything we are seeing today, Your Highness?
I say SADC again. Now go back to saying SADC, because my interests are bound to the borders of the entire SADC, and none of this. First, let's fight the indoctrination. The indoctrination of the problems is that we as traditional leaders have accepted the system and have become ambassadors of that system. So we need to automatically move and free ourselves. We need to be free, sovereign, and independent from the entire system so that we can start making laws ourselves. Now, you have parliament, which is the supreme law, and all those people are elected by politicians. You have people who are left in communities to die in communities, and their great-grandchildren will also sit there, but you do not trust them with 1 million, but you know where they are to build a road in your own community. So it is really up to us as Africans if we want to walk away speedily towards the change that we want. Also, we can't realize any change if you're still using the same ID system that colonized you. We can't call ourselves free. On this straw man is still not renounced. So we have to renounce our straw man and do the status correction of our own thing, and also do the declaration of words, because it's very dangerous in the law when you say certain words only to find out those words actually are the one colonizing you deeper than being colonized, where you are colonized. So we need intervention of traditional leaders to stand out of the law. Now, we have traditional leaders who are just the salary takers from all these governments in SADC.
Yes.
And it became my problem when I wrote them one of the letters and say, no, I can't take your salary from. It's like I'm agreeing that you colonize my people continuously, you take their minerals, and you take everything that they have for the benefit of yourself.
Yes. So how do we do that? How do we throw away the books that have brought us here, that have changed our mindset, without then sounding like we are rebelling against our governments? Because some of these things are entrenched in our law today, Your Highness. So how do we get to that place where we say, we as Africans, the traditional chiefs, for example, for them to be heard, right now they are occupying a certain seat at the table as set by our current laws across SADC?
Yeah, foreign laws you can't amend. I'm very sorry about that. The system has been put. This government is foreign to us. So as it is a foreign to us, we employ their strawmen. They are them to be the representative of our own issues and affairs by voting.
Yeah.
And by the simplicity of the vote, it doesn't mean that you have a government. It means that you have the administration. Before you can say you have that government with actually the right law, and that's why you say the parliament and to be elected now. The question that I always ask, what role do we play? We first have to define our role as traditional leaders in this whole thing. Because it's like we joined something we know nothing of. So I'm saying certify yourself as the supreme law of the land as a traditional leader. Certify yourself first as the supreme law of the land, because you have to make sure that your people are eaten, your people are drinking. We are the ones who are receiving complaints when you're sitting on the bench.
Yes. Right.
Self-confirm with your government, with the people.
Yeah.
They entered with the army and declared themselves a government. So arguing with something that you found, we do draft what is called the 10-pack for a country's community that wants to free the traditional leaders. Because at the end of the day, traditional leaders can't talk. They're the ones who sold the land. So people can free tradition. Normally would write for a kingdom to sign those declarations and then refer them to the United Nations.
Yeah. I just want to I just want Joshua Bishop to come in here, latching on to what His Highness is saying. How do we bring our traditional voice back from the back foot? Because right now, you and I were sharing notes about a man who has been recognized by our High Court as a king. And none of us are comprehending what that means. We also, is it genuine? What do you mean? Because for us, the idea of a monarchy has become subservient to anything else that we know now. How do we bring the voice of our traditional leaders, of our traditional council back in forefront, leading the conversations that are important to us? Also because Africa has been accused of poor governance as a continent. Many Africans right now feel as if we have let ourselves down by abusing the resources that His Highness is talking about. So how would traditional leadership come in to perhaps rectify things, to redefine the Africa we want?
Initially, we have to look at education as key. But before we can even get to education, we needed a new quality of young politicians. Young politicians who are not ambitious for office, but who are ambitious for transformation of the constitutional mandate on which the democratic government as a foundation is sitting on. And until that piece of document is transformed to prioritize the indigenous leaders and our kings as supreme above the law, we will constantly be producing servants of the same democratic system. So it sits right at the core of our government formation, which becomes the constitutionalization of democratizing Africa, which was an agenda of the West, particularly the Americans and the British, when they said we want Africa to be democratic, though Britain itself is not democratic. And some of the most successful countries in the world are not democratic.
The Emirates, for example,
why we are
absolute monarchies.
Why we are stuck with this democracy, only the devil and his mother-in-law can tell us why it is so important that we must become democratic. I'll tell you why. We must become democratic because under a democratic government, the Western world still has an upper hand of doing business and usurping products and resources from those countries because it's under the Roman Dutch law. The framework of the law under democracy allows multinational companies to purchase, to own, to drive, to run, to influence, to infiltrate, to lobby for regime change. And under rights, it means that if you are in that country, depending on what, if you're human right, you as a community, look at what South Africa has done. Orania, under democracy. A group of Afrikaners said we don't want to become part of the South African government. We want to build our own country within South Africa, with their own flag, with their own money, inside a democratic country. They have a democratic right to do that. But under the monarchical space, you might be told, if you don't like it here, pack your bags and go home. So democracy is a convenient partner of colonialism.
It's Capital 100.4 FM, Harare Zabit. Only because of time, we are going to put a comma on this discussion today as we are exploring and trying to bring back the voice, our traditional voice, into who we are, taking a clear picture in the mirror. When you look at yourself in the mirror today, would you say the governance system that we're using now are truly reflective of who we were? And do you not find it odd that the most stable countries on the continent are actually countries that are run by absolute monarchies? It's Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's Habit. Many thanks to our Highness for indulging us today. We hope, because it's Africa Month, towards the Africa we want, towards Agenda 2063, we're going to continue to engage you, Your Highness, so you can help us understand and appreciate how we can get to that place where Africa, again, is living according to her own narrative. Thank you so much, Your Highness, for joining us. And also to Menzi must say that indeed.
Hola.
Indeed. And to you, Menzi, thank you so much for joining us. We have got to catch the news. It's Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's Heartbeat.